Well, just before our show, I talked to Mohammed Munir. He's a professor in virology and viral zoonosis at the Lancaster University. I started by asking him how worried we should all be about the outbreak of hantavirus.
It is certainly very unusual and isolated outbreak for the first time being reported onto the water within a cruise ship environment. So certainly there is a lot of information that needed to be unfolded because this virus is out there for around 50 years, but not a lot of research has been conducted. In this particular case, there have been some of the questions, though still are outstanding and needed to be investigated. For example, the original source of the infection, where actually the infection has come from, which one is the index case, and how much impact is going to have in next couple of weeks and so on. So therefore, there's a lot of information that is not yet available. However, we do know that this virus is more pathogenic than many other viruses that we have come across. For example, it has around a case fatality rate of 35% compared to corona, which has 0.01%. So overall, the virus is very impactful.
So the time period between when a person is infected and when they start to show symptoms, what is known as the incubation period, we're hearing that can last up to 8 weeks. Could an infected person be infecting others in that time? How does hantavirus spread?
So one of the unique characteristics of the hantaviruses compared to other viruses that we are familiar with, it has a very long incubation period that could be up to 8 weeks, which means that if the person is infected now, in next 2 months, they can start showing clinical sign. And that add one of the major complexity, because you can imagine that within the cruise ship environment, people could be allowed to disembark and repatriated to the home and could still start showing clinical signs in next 8 weeks. And that is one of the aspects that has to be considered quite importantly here in this context of the outbreak. And people, for example, could have been infected at very early stages of the of this outbreak that has been around a couple of days now, but still could be hiding and harboring the infection. And within next 8 weeks or so, they can start showing clinical sign. So in this context, the tracking and the tracing and identifying who could actually be infected is going to be quite critical in next couple of months.
And just the point again, so people who could be infected could be infecting others in this incubation period.
So one of the key characteristics here is that the person who is not showing clinical sign is less likely to spread the infection. So the person who has started showing clinical sign initially at the stage, at the early stages of the infections are like a flu-like symptoms, but as it progresses, then it develops into the respiratory or the kidney failure context. So this is different than the coronaviruses. In the coronaviruses, people who are asymptomatic, they can spread the infection. But here in the context of the hantaviruses, people who are showing the clinical sign when the virus is actively replicating within the body and is producing a lot of viruses, that is the stage when the person can infect the other person.
And Professor, who has the highest risk of getting infected?
So hantaviruses are known to infect human of any age and gender and the race. So there is no any peculiar predisposition factors when it comes to the human. However, we do know that within the cruise ship environment, the majority of the people who've been traveling, they are senior citizen, 50 years and plus, and all unfortunate people who have died, they were also closer to 60 or 60 plus. So we do know, generally speaking, in a public health perspective, is that anybody who is more than 55, 60 and have some vulnerability or other comorbidities and other medical conditions, they are vulnerable to any kind of infection, and hantaviruses are not the exception.
Spanish authorities are now preparing to receive the 140 people or so on board the cruise ship this weekend. They're calling it an unprecedented operation. Could you just give us a sense of, what that operation would entail and what would be the challenges for Spanish authorities?
I think the central dogma in the whole context of the hantavirus in this international outbreak is contact tracing, because that is the most critical aspect, how quickly and effectively we can contain this outbreak. So now you can imagine if people will be disembarked and they will be letting go. I'm sure there are instruction out there that they needed to self-isolate, and they have to carry on reporting showing any kind of clinical symptoms, whether they are associated with this virus or not associated with this virus. But the major challenge lies that how effectively those people are managed and monitored. For example, the person who has arrived within the UK from the cruise ship has already been put into the self-isolation for 45 days. And this is a really long time. So longer the time, less likely is the person is going to follow those rules. So effective monitoring of this contact tracing whole procedure is the critical step in defining how quickly we can contain this outbreak.
Will all those who will disembark the ship, will they all have to quarantine?
People even who, so the first stage is that people who are tested positive, they will be put under close monitoring in the hospital setting, where the hospitals are very specialized airborne system where you have literally a very good control onto the air particles and so on. So for them to be treated within the hospital would be the best case scenario. People who will be tested negative, they still have to self-isolate and be under quarantine and monitoring, again, because the long incubation period. So maybe at this stage, they are not showing any clinical sign, and the virus that is harboring within the person is very low to be detected, but that doesn't mean they are clear from the infection. So until they don't really show any clinical sign for up until the 6 or 7 week, then they have to stay isolated. And 7 to 8 week is only on the assumption that the first week they have already got the infection.
Just to your earlier point, Professor, several countries are now racing to track the hantavirus with the goal of containing the outbreak. From where you sit, are things going according to plan in this regard?
I think if we really look onto the scenario of last week or so in this whole outbreak, I think everything is working according to the nature of the virus, according to the nature of biology, and as we anticipate. By saying that, what I mean is that there are around 150 people. Those were at the cruise ship. And only 3 people have died, and only 8 to 9 people have been tested positive. So you can imagine overall the infection rate is relatively low, and that is because the virus is relatively harder to spread from one person to another person compared to other viruses like corona, which was very easy to spread out. So therefore, must say that at the moment, every regulatory body, every body that is involved in monitoring the infection, including World Health Organization, CDC, and other, for example, MHRA here in the UK, they are trying to contain this infection as quickly as possible. And so far, everything is working out as planned.
All right. Well, thank you to Professor Mohammed Munir, Professor in Virology and Viral Zoonosis at Lancaster University.
Thanks for having me.